today's discussion, we are going to be talking about evidence-based management and how leaders and people in organizations and HR can use evidence to make better decisions and elevate their impact in their organizations. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It's part of my educational upbringing in organizational psychology. It's really central to the practice that I've had throughout my career, to my values, how I try to make decisions in my own life. And so to have these two experts join me today is a great joy, and I'm very pleased to share it with you all. So I will quickly introduce our guests, and then I will kick it over to them. First, Naz Dormani has applied her expertise in organizational psychology over 20 years in roles with both private and public enterprises, where she leads people strategy, talent management, leadership and organizational development, and much more. She has a PhD in organizational leadership from the Chicago School and a master's in organizational psychology from the Manchester Business School. She's passionate about transformational leadership, optimizing growth, and the infinite possibilities to continuously evolve, essentially helping organizations and their people succeed. We also have Aaron Halliday. He's the CEO of Prometheus Works and Director of ScienceForWork and CEBMA, where he focuses on science communication to promote evidence-based practices in both education and business management. Aaron has a PhD in organizational psychology from Western University and is passionate about building healthy organizational cultures and greater personal and professional resilience. So welcome to Naz and Aaron. Now, before we get started, anybody who's here, who's watching, I encourage you to pop a line in the chat, introduce yourselves, where you're watching from. I also would love anybody who's watching just to give me the thumbs up that you are seeing and hearing us clearly. So I'll take a moment and just wait for anybody to comment and share some of that. In the meantime, I will also encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn if you aren't already, to stay updated on future events and to connect with our guests, Aaron and Naz, as well. Okay, let's get into our rapid fire round here. So we do this is a tradition here, just to get to know our guests a little bit better, learn a bit about them. So I will start with a question and I will go Naz and then Aaron. Okay, you guys ready?
Ready.
Perfect. Question number one, who is your favorite musical artist or band?
My favorite musical artist and their band is called The Head and the Heart. And I swear I didn't choose them for the band name. Their music's actually quite good, but it's on brand for anyone who's in psychology, I suppose.
Nice.
I appreciate a wide variety of music. I like jazz, so Miles Davis is up there, but I also like techno and things like that too. So Sven Väth is also another favorite of mine.
Nice. Okay, so those are all new ones for me, and I'm excited to look them up.
Okay, great.
Okay, so back to Naz. If you could live anywhere for 1 year, where would it be and why?
It would definitely be New Zealand. I visited there several years ago, and anywhere and everywhere you look and explore and experience, it's just this incredible, vast landscape of infinite, possibilities and joy and love for nature. So yeah, I'm not typically an outdoor person, but it certainly converted me. It's absolutely incredible.
That's awesome. I have not been there, but I am rewatching Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah,
yes,
you need to
agreed
go.
from my couch. Yeah.
Yeah, go.
I like Spain. I think that would probably be another place that I would like to go. But New Zealand's up there for sure.
So you like Spain, so you've been to Spain?
No, I have been to Spain, yes, but I would like to spend more time there. Yeah.
Gotcha. Awesome. Okay, and last question, and often I think the most revealing. If you could have dinner with any person in history, who would it be?
Well, I don't know about the revealing part, but I'm going to stick to my original answer I shared with you guys when we connected a while ago, and it would have to be John Lennon. I mean, I also love the Beatles, but I think just fascinated by musical artists who cross over different spectrums between love and socio-political, issues, and just would have loved to see and get into his brain. I think he was gone too soon. So yeah, I think we'd kick back and have a great chilled night chatting about a vast variety of topics.
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
Aaron, what do you think?
I'm gonna take this a totally different direction, and I'd probably go to somebody who is at probably like super knowledgeable in the future about how the world ends, and maybe we could somehow prevent the end of the world. That'd be really cool.
At least there's
I
a hint
appreciate.
of optimism there. You know,
I don't
the
know.
end of the
Well,
world, but let's find the right solution
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
prevent it. Yeah, good.
Well, it's not optimistic, but it's proactive. Like, I'll give you
It
credit for
is
that.
proactive. Optimism that the end of the world can be saved is good. Is good too.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into it further, I want to just call back a little bit here and why I'm so excited to have you both as part of this discussion. So, um, as organizational psychologists, evidence-based practice is really central to who we are and where we exist in the broader space of HR and the work we do in organizations. And where I first really materially got into it was with an organization called Science for Work. And what we did, and Aaron's nodding, and Aaron is director of Science for Work currently and is putting out some
Yeah.
amazing content and work around that. But really advocating for evidence-based practice, trying to link the value in academic workplace research to practical challenges and the types of things that people can really take away and use in their organizations. At the same time, within organizations, there's this whole world of complexity and political realities and all sorts of things that happen that I haven't had the experience in necessarily. And so connecting with Naz and having some of those types of conversations and then bringing everybody together for a lens on the value and promise of these practices and how they meet the realities of the workplace is really what I'm excited to get into. So, with that framing, Aaron, maybe I'll start with you. If you could just tell us a little bit about your personal journey and your interest in evidence-based practice.
Yeah, I mean, my personal journey is much probably like yours in the sense like I have a background in IO psychology too, and I got affiliated shortly out of my career with an organization called, as you said, Science for Work, and another organization called the Center for Evidence-Based Management. I am not the primary, I'm not like the grand poobah of either of those organizations. I am a director for Science for Work, and yeah, but with regards to that, I'm also a fellow for CEBMA, and I'm affiliated with these organizations much because of my ideological framework, and I think it's important that businesses don't purely just try to extract the most capital out of people, and that they try to do good while they do things, even though evidence-based practice is a lucrative way to do business too. But I think that what led me to these organizations was a passion and a curiosity for the science that I study, and for a better understanding of people and humanity and how things work. And by understanding those things, it led me to understand or search for an understanding of how business works and how that sort of thing. But
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate that often when we try and advocate for things that people should be doing more of in organizations, we need to couch it in why it's going to make them more money, why it's going to make them, better able to accomplish their goals. And I don't want to abandon that line of, value for these types of practices, but I appreciate that your orientation towards it is more rooted around how it can help people in a humanistic way.
yeah.
So I appreciate that. Naz. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and your approach?
Yeah, I mean, I may go Freudian and bring it way back to my childhood and, observational study sort of context. When it really just started being thrown into, family dynamics and us moving to Canada from Iran and a lot of different challenges, socioeconomically, the different politics and in-laws and who are moving from there to Canada and everyone living in the same house. There are a lot of behavioral dynamics as a young child to sort of navigate and adapt to. And I was just curious and observing and absorbing and, trying to go deep into sense making. And I think from there, I was also really mindful, and I always have tried to be, in not making assumptions. I think when you go through growing up in Ottawa, and it was quite not very diverse at the time, so just mindful of bullying and being really mindful of, again, no judgments. And I think it just started from there. And then I got into giving advice, like through all my part-time jobs, to management. So I was a mini OD practitioner without even knowing it. And then when I found out that I could make a career out of it, marrying business and psychology together, because I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs, I realized, wow, this is really cool. So how do I aggregate these behavioral dynamics together and turn them into experiments, or draw conclusions, through some sort of methodology, and make sense and go a lot deeper into my understanding of what was going on and help others and better understanding, so that we can minimize bias and make some really informed decisions around how everything's interplaying. So I think that was the journey. And I'm really lucky and fortunate that I paid attention to a lot of signs, and I trusted my own sort of intuition and synchronicity of the world, and finding what I believe to be a calling. So yeah.
That's awesome. I think first of all, I relate to both journeys. And like I said, I value evidence-based practice beyond just what it can do, materially, the process, but I think even more, what drew me to it and what um, continues to fuel my enthusiasm for it is my personality. And that is sort of a couple of the words that you said around curiosity and sense making, and then and Aaron, like, just wanting to understand the dynamics and what's happening. And as I got more educated on the process and the language of decision making using evidence, and um, have been involved in different ways, practically related to research and analytics and some other things, like, it's given me that lens on some of these challenges that just kind of spoke to just who I am and what I value and what makes sense to me. So I feel like, I don't know, we kind of meet on some of those levels.
For sure.
So what I just to introduce the topic of evidence-based management a little bit more, and before I do, I want to call back again to anybody who's viewing. If you have questions that you want, I'll feed them back into the conversation. So please drop them in the chat. Any reactions you have, again, the chat is the place to go. So please drop those in there, and I'll be monitoring as well. But the practice of evidence-based management has been adapted from other fields that have, to varying degrees, adopted it over time. And if you look in a textbook, you will find definitions of it that exist. And yet, as you practice it, as you get into it, I think you have your own lens and your own spin as well. So, Naz, maybe I'll start with you on this one. But what does evidence-based management mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've spoken to it from a practical standpoint, and the reason why I continued into graduate studies is really to refine and deepen my own methodology and understanding of how that sense-making process and the gathering of people analytics and data can help inform decision making. So I would say it's a compilation of a lot of intra and interdynamics that are at play. relationally, even between groups, systems, departmental, organizational, internal, external sort of environments, and how all those components are influencing one another. But if you've got a specific problem that you're trying to solve because of, obviously there's layers of complexity in what I just alluded to, then you want to design some form of program or process or evaluation that's really going to capture the scope of what it is that you want to measure, and what's the outcome that, are hypotheses. So I try to take assumptions that I hear in a practical space and turn them into hypothetical questions and try to design some kind of process or system or assessment that helps us gain deeper insights into what's going on to minimize a lot of bias. Because, and I know we're going to get to this perhaps a little bit later, but I think that's one of the things in a practical environment that you just continuously need to, and I would just add, like, the value that we're providing as IO Psychs in a business context is how do we reduce bias as much as possible, right? And help people check their own assumptions, and not judge them for having them at all. It's just a matter of reframing them so that we can test to see, what's true and what isn't. So yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing that is a sort of a theme in that answer is that the process of making decisions with an orientation towards evidence starts at framing problems and asking questions, and then investigating and better understanding. And a word that I learned afterwards, just from like exposure to the tech world, is like solutioning, which is observing something and then just finding solutions and moving and having a bias for action, which is great, but and very characteristic of people and organizations. But um, the alternative to that is maybe we observe something that's happening around us and we identify it as a problem, but then we investigate or we challenge assumptions that we might have, and then we embark on a process that is resting on what we're seeing and the quality of the evidence that we can gather, and then moving from that. So my feeling around that is there might be a big process to what somebody would prescribe as evidence-based management, but even starting from that place, I think positions you way better than if you didn't do it.
Yeah, and I think what you're alluding to in the former case, Michael, like, I think there's experimentation that is so required, and fostering a safe space to ideate and get creative and solution. And, I think that's part of the innovative process, so to speak. And then there's, depending on the risk and impact of who and what you're trying to solve and the people involved, then a more sort of structured approach may be best. So, particularly as a concrete example, when you're making selection decisions or promotion decisions, particularly for influential leadership roles that are going to have a ripple effect on culture, you really want to make sure you get that right. And you're not, making the wrong choice and promoting people who aren't ready, or bringing people into the culture who aren't aligned with the values. So yeah, I just sort of, again, assess it that way.
Mm-hmm. Aaron,
Okay.
what does it mean
Yeah.
to you?
I mean, it's at its core, I think it is similar to science in some ways, not in all ways, but mostly it's about refining signal to noise ratio. So it's about being able to take a concrete message out of the information that's available. So if you were to reduce it to the simplest kind of idea, I think it's the application of the best available evidence, whether it be from scientific information or your organization's data, or practitioner information or stakeholder evidence or anything else, to make better informed decisions. Often in business, it's perhaps even more importantly in life, we don't take an adequate to look at the information around us. We don't reflect on things enough. And if we were to do that a little bit more in a systematic sort of way, uh, just making the time for it and putting the energy into that exercise, you can come out with better decisions. It's about asking clearly defined and answerable questions, as she said, but also acquiring, appraising, aggregating, and applying information from all sorts of sources, and assessing how did this actually work out at the end of the day? Did we wind up in a better place than we would have otherwise? And if we didn't, how can we adjust course to do it better next time?
Mm-hmm. First of all, yes, I appreciate your framing of that, and I wanted to. I know I had shared with you guys a bit of an outline, but I wanted to follow up on the thread with some of that, because my thought is, okay, number one, the process in and of itself has value just in how it can help inform how we think about problems and how we approach solutions and how we improve and learn from some of those things. And then it's, well, why don't people do more of this? And what are individual and organizational barriers to that? And as people are observing the conversation and listening, you might be reflecting on yourselves and what you see in your own organizations and the extent to which you may or may not. And certainly some organizations do more of this than others and are more oriented to that. But just to follow on your descriptions of the process and some of the points of value that you mentioned around what you would get out of it, I wanted to follow up and like just what do you think is like the biggest value that somebody who started to improve in this would see from implementing it in their work and in their organizations? And either of you can jump on this. I'm not,
I think there's a lot of value that comes from this. Like you have better decision making. People are more innovative. You probably have a bit more psychological safety in these organizations. People are more adaptable. They're probably better at evaluating risk at the end of the day because they're able to make better calculations of this risk. And assuming that they're using evidence appropriately and not omitting key chunks of it or cherry picking data or omitting stakeholder evidence, because that's a huge component, I think, with making ethical decision making. I think you're more likely to see trustworthiness and socially responsible business practices come as a result as well.
Yeah, I there's not much more I could add. I was going to go towards the trust and the integrity, the transparency, a lot of the ethical values. And any organization you look at is going to have their quote unquote cultural values on their websites. But I think the evidence-based approach is what actually helps translate that into practice. And I think the more you embed it across the entire people strategy and programs, the more credibility and collaboration and input and output feedback you're going to be able to foster through a listening strategy as well, so that the employee experience is totally optimal, because it's not just about the data, and there's a lot of data in organizations across every single facet. You're going to have IT, cybersecurity, marketing, patient or consumer demographics and context to absorb. You're going to have engagement surveys, like it's on and on and on. So we can get into how you govern for that and you house it. But yeah, I think establishing trust is huge, because and how you use the data itself. Yeah.
Great.
I mean, to your like, I think one of the biggest benefits to me, so certainly as a process that can raise credibility, that can ground perceptions in something a little bit more objective. But then also the interpersonal element of it, where it does, in theory, offer the opportunity for more democratic decision making because people can contribute in different ways, even if they have less experience, if they have different perspectives. We are, as a practice, incorporating information from different sources and prioritizing a focus on perspectives that can offer value that come from different places. And then there's also, then the interpersonal and political dynamics around that might make organizations or individuals hesitant to approach a decision-making process that takes some of those different perspectives into play, that takes time, that, has other things. So I'm curious, like, what you think the biggest barriers, whether organizationally and some of the forces at play there, or even, hey, I'm a leader and I kind of get the value of this, but like, why wouldn't somebody do that, or why would they perceive maybe that this wouldn't be something that they'd want to do?
I generally think that the things that stand as hurdles, we'll say, to the practice of evidence-based management are generally the same things that are probably hurdles to functional operation of business management, generally speaking, in a lot of ways. So you have like authoritarian top-down leadership, structures that are highly focused on control and maintaining power structures. We would probably put in there business opacity, like a focus on that rather than business transparency, because if in order to make decisions, you have to incorporate with evidence-based management more diverse pieces of evidence, and that would require, the more transparent nature of it. Myopic focus, like if you're just rushing to make quarter to quarter revenue every time, that might be you're not thinking about the long picture or the bigger picture sometimes. uh when I think about this, I this is going to sound hokey, but if you leave out certain components to it, uh you're likely to make some mistakes, and that's why I think that if if we're practicing evidence-based management, we kind of have to take it as a whole in some regards, and apply it as general as we can. And so when obstructions get in the way of a single component of this, it's much like baking a cake sometimes without the baking soda, or it might still taste like chocolate, but it's not going to come out as you would want a cake. So
Can you say more about that? Because I feel like I have often advocated a little bit differently,
mm,
which is, yes, there's sort of a top to bottom process that offers value throughout a decision-making journey with respect to how you incorporate evidence, how you evaluate the quality of the information you're evaluating on, how you synthesize that, and then how you make decisions and iterate on it. But at the same time, my feeling is, and I haven't tested this in any
sure.
rigorous way, but my feeling is, hey, you do any one of those things better, you synthesize ideas better, you take a glance at the quality of the evidence you're looking at, you will just, without doing anything else, be in a better place
Oh,
anyway.
I
So like,
completely agree with you there. Yeah,
okay, so yeah,
I'm not denying that. What I'm saying though is that the whole is stronger than the sum of its parts. So
hmm.
if you look at the cake metaphor, the cake is probably better with the baking soda, and it's they.
Oh, frozen there, eh?
Yeah, yeah, Aaron, we lost you for a second. Um, okay. As what do you think? I think Aaron's sorting himself
You
out
know
over there.
what? It was interesting listening to Aaron speak to it so eloquently, and I agree with him conceptually. My brain sort of reframes it uh, more so. Aaron's back.
So
Aaron, I was
sorry.
just saying I agree with you. And it was really eloquent hearing you speak to it on such a great conceptual level. I think there's a macro component, or the sort of the big picture for me holistically of like, where's this organization at? What stage in their maturity are they at? Because that's really going to dictate the resources and the time, and where they can actually go in sort of fostering or curating evidence. If you are in a growth state as a startup, you're going to have that, you're going to need that bias to action, and that reactiveness to be agile. If you're a lot more sophisticated or you're a dinosaur, you're going to have a lot of potentially bureaucratic processes and layers, which is going to slow things down. And that doesn't mean that there's evidence-based approaches built into that at all, or it's going to be a lot harder and slower to change those things because they're kind of built into the history of the organization. So I think that's kind of the under layer that I would keep in mind, and then I would go into more of a micro primitive state of like, what is the motivation at different systematic layers within that organization? Because, you know, I think Aaron was speaking to this in a different way. You're going to have different leadership styles. You're going to have to look at the comp structure and the incentives and what's driving behavior. You're going to have to look at the org infrastructure and whether or not the silos can be prevented if they've been created unintentionally or intentionally, and what that looks like. So to me, all of that said and considered, I would, in true form, practically speaking, would want to do a diagnostic to actually understand where the hurdles are, and to understand, you know, what they are and whether or not they can be sort of quarantined and dealt with on their own, or whether or not they've totally spread and now it's part of the culture. So like, that's where I go. Is from an org development standpoint, you always want to start with a diagnostic, and you want to gather a lot of the input. But I also love, and you know, anyone who works with me knows this, I love the iterative process of constantly gathering data, right? And letting that inform the next iteration and the next iteration of how we evolve and improve and, you know, pivot accordingly. So I think there's a balance between the structure and then keeping things organic and iterative to go where you need to go based on what's relevant at that time. Because when you look at COVID, you know, it forced everybody to iterate and pivot and figure out what to do. So you've got to kind of expect the unexpected there too. Sorry.
No, I completely agree with you. You always want to do a diagnostic and do a needs assessment to understand where your problems are. I was speaking more to likely landmarks that are probably potential pitfalls lurking
For sure.
in the bog. With regards to where I was going to end, but I was so accidentally kicked off. Basically, I think it's important that organizations try to implement this as much as possible, and I just think it's better if they do more. And I don't think that you're going to hurt yourself necessarily if you implement scientific evidence alone by any means. I just think you should. Organizations would be making more out of it if they applied more components, generally speaking. A broad scale approach is probably going to have a broader impact than the individual components alone.
Yeah, well, listening to you both describe it, I think I get certainly what you're saying to Naz's point about the macro level of organizational maturity around a process like this. If you dabble, you may not necessarily be a champion of the growth of the organization along this maturity spectrum. And then now to your point, like there are different contextual realities that organizations operate in, whether it's the need for quick action, in which case you may cost yourself more than you would benefit by following down a path like this around certain decisions, compared to making broad sweeping decisions at a large scale. But at the same time, like you said, anybody who works with you knows your orientation to this, but that sends a message as well, right? That starts to trickle across the organization, and I think set a bit of a precedent as well. So that's my sense of it. But I appreciate your perspectives. When you think about on the micro level, somebody's listening to this conversation, they perhaps are starting to develop an understanding of what evidence-based practice can look like for them, opportunities where they might start to improve or implement it. But on that micro level, when we think about the individual leader, practitioner, HR person, what personal qualities do you think help somebody really be effective? And by effective, I mean achieve the type of impact they're trying to achieve using evidence-based practices. What muscles do you think they would really need to flex beyond just engaging with this process?
Well,
yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
no, it's okay. I went last. Go ahead.
It's all good. We're so polite. This podcast is being taken in Canada, so you can take that cultural perspective in mind. That's my bias, I guess, as Canadians being nice and polite. I would say on a personal level, and I don't love going towards, business jargon, catch-all constructs, but I do think there's an element of emotional intelligence involved, just from a self-regulation, awareness, social awareness, and just through the sheer nature of understanding all of those behavioral dynamics. And I think Aaron alluded to the reflexivity part, as a crucial component. You both did. But if you have reflexivity, then you've got to understand how you're influencing that environment, how the environment's influencing you. And that coupled with a scientific but practical approach, and how we translate that. And that means reducing your own bias, suspending your own emotions, being able to absorb a lot of data or information without drawing conclusions, putting your own interest at bay, because that doesn't matter. It's about, what it is that you're trying to solve for that team or for the organization or for the business. So it's really difficult, I think, for a lot of individuals who may not do this for a living to naturally decouple that. And I'm still continuously having to exercise that muscle, even as a practitioner, every single day and moment, because it's difficult within the org context not to, if you're adaptable, at least, you risk becoming a byproduct of that environment. And you've got to keep those boundaries kind of straight, because you're trying to build the relationships and the trust and adapt enough so you understand the culture within which you're operating. But then you also want to try to operationalize what it is you're trying to solve without your own influence imposing that or being projected upon it. So there's a lot of muscles at play here. I would not say it's an easy thing to do. But there is a coupling and decoupling of how you fit within the environment, but also how you stay neutral enough to observe and absorb and dissect all this information in a bit of through some form of methodology.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in there that I appreciated. I think where I might diverge a little bit from you is that I don't, and this might just be like a footnote kind of thing, is that I don't think that people should believe that you need to have a huge scientific background necessarily to be an evidence-based manager or an evidence-based leader. I think that those traits that they really beat into you in your grad school in science or in psychology, they will make you probably better in your efficacy to be an evidence-based manager if you go down that path. However, I think that you can be an evidence-based manager with not a high degree of education, no scientific training. I think that it's about understanding what's important, lending from the scientific method, maybe, if you understand what I'm saying. In terms of the muscles you'll have to flex, I think critical thinking and open-mindedness and really attention to detail, humility, being able to look in the mirror and say I'm wrong occasionally, that really goes a long way, as well as being adaptable and flexible. You pointed that out, and that's a very big important part of it as well. And I think your eagerness and willingness to try new things. And I think that's a huge hurdle too for businesses. We were talking about that earlier, that this is the way we always done things. And that's not helpful if you're looking for an improved method. And that's what evidence-based management at its core becomes in some ways. So.
I like that, because it can also be used to validate the way we're currently doing things potentially, right? But I love the perspective of it revolving around continuous improvement. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think to parse some of those, the cocktail of effective evidence-based practitioner skill sets, there are parts of that will predispose somebody, like critical thinking, humility, the ability to take a sort of critical lens on process, and pull yourself a little bit out of that, to have that different perspective, are like baseline. Like I think if you couldn't do that, you probably wouldn't understand really what we're talking about. In any sense, like it wouldn't make a lot of sense. But I think there was a lot of themes related to your ability to manage relationships, to understand context, that from having run in the circles of practitioners who do this for a living, that's the gap for a lot of people, which is I have the skill set, I have quantitative, qualitative, scientific research background, but nobody listens to me, and I'm ruffling feathers, and
Wow.
like it's just understanding how to be effective in those interpersonal spaces is often the theme I hear coming out of those types of conversations. Is how do I build better alliances? How do I validate people through this process and not, like just be the person that is bringing in information and evidence that's just kind of rolling over everybody else's perspectives. So I think you both sort of captured a lot of that.
Thank you. I will say that coming fresh out of graduate school, I was definitely one of those people, and it's not an effective way by any means. Like you can't
Good humility.
force somebody to take on an evidence-based management position
Yeah.
or an evidence-based position. In fact, the evidence would suggest that other methods, like the Socratic method, where you ask people questions, is much more effective. So, hard lessons learned sometimes,
Yeah, and I wonder what your take is on this, but I think in its simplest form for me, I would say it really shouldn't have anything to do with you, your credentials, what you're trying to prove and validate. Like there's an ego component, and that's difficult because it goes back to the decoupling of like, of course, those personality traits of openness and curiosity are going to lend you into asking the right questions, or but you want to align them to what the team and the organization's trying to solve. And then once you sort of get that alignment right, then it's wholeheartedly, for me anyway, about just trying to solve that for the betterment of the team and the business and the org. And I just let my skill set, I attempt at least for it to organically transfer over where it needs to. But I also, in the spirit of ongoing data collection, am continuously taking that iterative feedback in. Even people's reactions and resistance gives you insight on how to pivot and navigate, or change your tactic a little bit. So you're constantly measuring that as you implement and design those types of evaluations to get to that outcome. But I've also, that's an ongoing journey, but I would just say it's not about my background or what I'm there to do. And I think we all learn that in different ways over the course of our career. But I appreciate you sharing that, Aaron. I think we've all been on a similar journey.
Yeah, I relate to it also. And yeah, I think there's a process of personal growth that goes along with all these things, and an appreciation for different perspectives, and also like just the different language that people use to make sense of what they see around them. And it's not the same for any one person, and it's not to say that there's a right or righter way to make sense of those things, but sometimes it does take growth to maintain that perspective, to validate people, through the process. But that ultimately, if done right, this process should help that, because it values perspectives that aren't written in scientific journals, that come from people's own lived experiences, and how you derive value from all of those different things, really helps inform this process in a productive way, I think.
Yeah, in a way, I would say it is its own unique form of communication, because by collecting a bunch of forms of evidence, you're storytelling in a way that just mere language from one person's perspective, or even textbook definitions or things like that aren't going to capture. It'll give you a new, probably richer depiction of things. on the basis of the evidence that you collect.
And you've both touched on this at different points in time too, when we talk about various perspectives or variance in general or perception, right? I mean, oftentimes in a practical world, you're trying to validate your own existence of what you're doing there from an OD or org psych standpoint. And I've always said to senior leadership or clients, if you want to hear 500 different versions of the truth, then have at it. Keep doing what you're doing. But if you actually want to try to get some kind of validation or, the evidence-based understanding of what's going on in a standardized, objective, meaningful sort of way, and it's going to also prevent you from getting, people walking into your door and you hearing different versions of the same story, then let's just try to get that straight. And that typically works because, you're trying to prevent a gossip mill or inconsistent interpretations of context or situations. And it's so, so critical to do when you're trying to create alignment and org effectiveness and having everyone sort of gravitate to that common goal and move in a common direction. So I think that's another way to just sort of try to wrap your arms around complex or chaotic states of being and working.
It really helps with actionability, I think, too.
Yeah. And so, what do we do about it? Let's all kind of get on the same page about what the issues are. Everyone's going to have their own experience of what those issues are for a number of reasons, right? But let's understand its impact. Let's understand all the different components, the risks, the opportunities, and then, to Aaron's point, you can then get into action learning and action planning, which, by the way, is also OD methodology. So there you go.
Yeah, and I think just to call back, Naz, earlier to your description of evidence-based management, the one of the keywords being bias reduction, right? And that's what a lot of this is, right? Is an acknowledgement that people are limited in how they make decisions, and how do we, from an operational and process point of view, account and navigate the challenges that we all have and how we filter information through our own different lenses. And then to your point about, everybody's different experiences and hearing the same thing through different lenses, right? Like if you have a broader conversation in the landscape of information and the quality and what it's telling you, it doesn't invalidate anybody's experiences. And if people have conflicting experiences, those filter into the conversation, as opposed to if we're only talking about my experience and your experience, and then one wins out, it just butts people,
you're creating
against each other.
Yeah, you're just
and listen, you can find conflict in anything, but I think again, I just think there's opportunity to navigate the landscape a little bit differently.
Yes.
100%.
And I mean, that doesn't preclude people being incorrect, too. Like that we can be forgiving for that as well. That's fine.
No, 100%. 100%. And by the way, important point, because while in theory, this improves your batting average on your decisions in a lot of different ways, it's not a path to more certainty all the time. It's not a path.
It will not confirm certainty. There are no silver bullets. That does not happen ever.
Right.
And I think that's people will get frustrated and say, hey, if I follow this, I'm going to be so much more confident in the decision. And you, in theory, should have more confidence in the process you took to get to a decision. But it actually can introduce complexity, and it can broaden a conversation where there now may be less certainty around certain things, or more recognition of alternative explanations for other things. And
sure.
Yeah. So
when you bring up like 6 different options for something because you didn't even take time to reflect upon it before, it's going to make things more, challenging. But that's not necessarily bad. I think that's good.
Not necessarily. Exactly.
No, that's a great point that you guys raise. It's funny because I think through these methodologies and the practical landscape, when they're going well and you're getting good positive feedback loops. I had an executive reach out to me after doing a series of consulting at an organization through various clients there. And he was like, and he just wouldn't, he typically wouldn't reach out to spend time with anyone about anything related to people content, but he was literally asking for a silver bullet, solution. And then we talked it out, and he was like, oh, so you mean it's actually like a process to go through? And I'm like, yes. And let's break that down. Let's unpack it. Let's diagnose it. But you're right, Aaron. Like, I do think that there is an assumption of like, oh, there's got to be a silver bullet in here somewhere. And it's like, oh no, you got to do the work.
It's so easy to hang on to that, though.
Yeah,
people like the faith of it all.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think we're used to being sold that in the context that we play in, and it's a different sales pitch to say,
it's a harder sales pitch.
Business reality too, right? Yeah. Guys, like they want solutions yesterday. Time is a finite resource. They've probably been dealing with these issues for a really long time, and then they think that they want or need someone to have all the solutions. And oftentimes, actually, people themselves or teams and groups, organizations, whatever you're aiming to assess and diagnose, have the solutions themselves. So really, we're just kind of like highlighting all the various possibilities of how something can improve. And then you can prioritize in which order, because sometimes there's a sequence of doing A before B before C before you get there, or you're going to find really more efficient, effective ways of implementing, a better course. So yeah, I think to your point, Aaron, like those, you're creating 6 different or various options on how to move forward, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee or promise certainty. I appreciated that point.
Thanks. I have there's 2 other points that kind of go with that too, though. There's the idea that there's a novelty factor, I think, and I see evidence-based management, I think, since the COVID has really gotten more popular, and it's kind of the hot new thing on some levels for some business managers, and that is what's drawing them to it. And with that novelty, they believe it's a panacea or a silver bullet when nothing is in this world. Then the other thing is, like all methods, like all tools, like everything in this world, it could potentially be used malevolently too. So if you just try to optimize for the worst possible thing and you ignore stakeholder evidence and stuff like that, you're going to come out with some really weird ends, and it might not be very good for everyone. So it's about implementing things with some ethical background as well, and really make sure that you're not trying to optimize just for one thing, because that often results in some pretty horrible outcomes.
Which really takes us back to kind of that primitive point as well, when you were asking about hurdles, Michael, of like, what is the motivation behind what it is that we're trying to solve? And everyone's going to have different incentives that they're influenced by.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't want to, I acknowledge that I haven't done as good a job as acknowledging some of the comments and questions that have come in, because I didn't want to interrupt the conversation because I enjoy it so much. And I almost regret scheduling these for only an hour because I feel like this could go on a lot longer. But I want to acknowledge Mitch's comments and questions that he's been sharing throughout our conversation. And we'll circle back to one in particular, but Carla's question really lands right on the button of where we wanted to sort of hit at this point, which is, what resources can you suggest to continue learning more about evidence-based management? Aaron, you're smiling, so we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with the ScienceForWork. It's a great not-for-profit that basically communicates evidence-based concepts, usually from organizational psychology, but not limited exclusively to that. But then I'm also affiliated with another wonderful not-for-profit called the Center for Evidence-Based Management, and they provide learning materials of all sorts. They're teaching it in academic institutions worldwide, at dozens of universities, and they have a membership that you can buy that comes complete with a 15-module certificate program in evidence-based management. It's offered not only with CEBMA, but with Carnegie Mellon University, so it does have some weight behind it at the end of the day. Not that they don't have weight. I shouldn't have implied that, but the point being, at the end of the day, there are many ways that you can go about doing this, and there are many organizations willing to help. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me at I'll put that in the notes of the podcast. It's not a big deal, but there's many ways that you can take advantage of various resources. I will also say that this podcast is fantastic. Department 12 is another fantastic podcast by Ben. Yeah, just keep a lookout for our other IO Psych content. I think that's a great piece of advice.
I would just quickly add, from the practical, immediate standpoint, just take inventory of anything and everything that within your own role, within your department is considered data, and then triangulate that with interdepartmental data components, because I think that the more we overlay data and insights, the more we connect those dots together. I think the deeper the insights, and there's a lot of interrelationships, but it starts with just understanding what is defined and operationalized as data right now, and what's adding value, and which aspects of the business or in your role that would help inform your decision making, or what data pieces are missing. And then I think there's also an assessment on the quality of that data and the accuracy of the data, just to withhold the integrity of what's being measured, and the benefit, in terms of the outcomes that we're trying to get at, if that helps.
Yeah, it does. And I want to add that when we think about evidence, and we've touched on this, but how you incorporate evidence and information within your organization that you would often talk about as data, people analytics, but things that are emerging out of your own environment, and then incorporate information coming from academic research, from some of the resources that Aaron mentioned. As a former member of Science4Work and CEBMA, I've done the course, and I will second that as sort of a skill building orientation to evidence-based practice. But Science4Work is fantastic. Thank you for shouting out my own discussion series, because I appreciate that. I will add, often I'll also go to CIPD out of Europe. When I was working with Science4Work, I had some colleagues that were contributing to research reports and different things, and CIPD's work is often very rooted in appreciation of research, and I often will look there for some things as well. And then, Naz, to your point about look around you, what is the information? What are you leaning on day to day to make those decisions? And getting a sense of your own landscape, and starting to ask that question: how do we know what is the quality of the information that's informing our own perceptions? I think is a fantastic place to start.
I love that point. I would also take it at a granular level. If you found yourself with some disbelief, just apply it to your own life. Like, you don't have to do it in a workplace first. You can start making educated decisions in your home.
Yeah, 100%. I often will start, when I was presenting and talking publicly more frequently about evidence-based management, that's often where I'd start, which is, we make decisions based on evidence all the time. Your decision to come to this talk was probably informed by something that you may or may not call evidence.
Exactly.
But we don't think about it in that way.
No.
And
that somehow divorces it from its reality. It kind of makes it a bit more challenging for people to get involved with it. It doesn't have to be that difficult.
Absolutely. Sometimes we make it seem more complicated than it needs to be. And Aaron, you don't need to have a PhD. You don't need to have a research background to ask these types of questions more frequently and incorporate a little bit more of this process in your work. So with that, we're right at the hour. Mitch, I'm sorry we didn't get to your questions, but we'll circle back in the chat and get back to you. But thank you, everybody, for joining us today, who stuck with our conversation. Thank you so much to Naz, to Aaron, for sharing your insights and your experiences. To everybody who joined us today, again, the first place I think you can go is just our LinkedIns, because that's where we're broadcasting this today. So start there, get in touch with Aaron, get in touch with Naz. Reach out to me as well if you want to hear more about upcoming events and discussions. And happy holidays, happy New Year's, happy Hanukkah, 8th night of Hanukkah, for all who are celebrating and observing. And thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.